Entonces, pues esta tarde vamos a hablar un poco de cómo la criminalización funciona. Vamos luego a vamos a hablar un poco usando el ejemplo de El Salvador como un caso de estudio. Voy a tener una conversación con Jesse de CISPES en un momento. Y luego de ahí vamos a tener un diálogo en grupo con varias personas donde vamos a hablar de lo que ha pasado y cómo las corporaciones y el estado coluden para acelerar la maquinaria de detención y de deportación de ICE. Entonces, pues de nuevo, gracias por estar esta tarde aquí. Antes de que iniciemos con la primera parte, también quiero hacerles la invitación a ustedes que nos están acompañando a que pues que sea un espacio para ustedes también, ¿verdad? De que se sientan cómodos en participar en el chat, de que las personas que están participando en el diálogo, presentando, van a poder estar un poco al tanto, ¿verdad? Y quizás responder a lo que están diciendo en el momento. Entonces, pues también pueden usar ese espacio de esa manera. Y de último, si nos hacen el favor de también introducirse en el chat, su nombre, los pronombres y de dónde nos acompañan. Y pues quizás también si tienen una canción que les motiva en tiempos difíciles. Entonces, pueden introducirse en el chat por mientras. Y mientras hacemos la transición, a invitar a Yesenia, que vamos a poner spotlight, por favor. Ernesto, a Jessy y a mí.
Hola.
What's up? How you doing?
I'm good. Um, I didn't get a chance to send you resources, but I don't know if I'm able to share my screen.
Yeah,
Okay,
you can right now.
sweet. And then I'm gonna share maybe a couple of links for now in the chat, and then uh, follow up. Is everyone listening to us right now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were gonna present something else first and then me, but I'm ready.
All good. It's all good. Um, Ernesto,
Okay.
you help make sure Jesse's co-host to be able to screen share.
Okay, so I think it's sharing already.
Oh, you're good. All
Oh,
right.
that's not it. Sorry. This is always the nerve-wracking part because I'm like, what am I gonna show you guys? Okay. Um, I need to do this.
Cool. In the meantime, the folks keep introducing yourselves in the chat, and I'll set up a little bit of context as you're figuring out your visuals. Uh,
Mhm.
I invited Yesenia, as I mentioned earlier, because you know my family is part Salvadoran too. CSPES has done a lot of work for decades supporting organizing efforts and people-powered efforts in El Salvador. And what we're seeing in El Salvador right now, I think in many ways reflects the threats and dangers that are already happening here in the United States too. And so I thought it could be a good opportunity to just kind of ground our conversation today as we also learn about what's happening here in the US. So yeah, you want to kick us off a little bit about just introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, thank you, Danny, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm gonna do it this way because it's the easiest way to scroll through. So everyone's able to see the slide, right? Danny asked me not to make a presentation and just have some pictures, so I did my best. um, but yeah, my name is Yesenia. I'm also Salvadoran. My family came to the U.S. In 1980 and 1981, or 1981 and 1982. My immediate family during the Civil War, which was also, financed by the US. People were resisting decades of dictatorship by that point, and had gotten to a level of organizing and repression that they needed to take up arms to defend themselves. And the US spent um, billions of dollars to repress and destroy the organized people of El Salvador at that time. So I organized with CISPES, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, and it's been around since the 80s. And it's been a very important political home for me to connect with the social movements in El Salvador that are continuing to struggle and fight and organize against repression, capitalism, and yeah, things that we'll get into more.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that intro. And so as we were talking a little bit, right, and I know in the conversation we had a few days ago, like one thing that you brought up was like how a lot of what's happening now in El Salvador and like the mass criminalization and the way that the state has weaponized a lot of the conditions has been influenced by like decades of US pressure, right? And so whether it's like political or monetary pressure, like what can you tell us about what the role of the United States has been in like expanding criminalization over there too?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, obviously, I think there's been a characterization of El Salvador as a place that has a lot of gang violence that predates, that really sets up where we're at now. So it was really reduced for a long time in the public imaginary about that. I think, progressives, people on the left really have a pretty good understanding, if they know anything about El Salvador, that the role that the U.S. had played a role in that in the 80s, especially with destabilizing Central America and causing that. I think a lot of times people don't have as good of a grasp on the amount of money that the U.S. has spent in recent decades. In order to protect its economic interests really in that region at the end of the day, and probably test out a lot of things. So I put a list here of different initiatives that include hundreds of millions of dollars to supposedly address this issue of gang violence in El Salvador, because supposedly gangs were, the thing that El Salvador is defined by, and and the U.S., was the hero that was going to come in and fix it, and so we're looking at all the point that I like to make about this is just that clearly the U.S. If the U.S. has been spending all of this money in El Salvador to supposedly address the security issue, then there needs to be a clear understanding that there is a blame here about who who bears responsibility for the situation of insecurity that Nayib Bukele, the current president, inherited, right? And also, by the time he comes to office, El Salvador is already the second highest incarcerator in the world per capita, which is something that people don't really know. And we'll get into this a little bit more, is now the highest incarceration, has the highest incarceration rate in the world, which I think in the US, it's kind of deceiving in the sense that there's some cities that probably have even higher incarceration rates, but El Salvador incarcerates, its incarceration rate is really high. So I'll get into that also some more. But just to give kind of some background about the US's role, I wanted to share this image in terms of the amount of money that's been spent on punitive policing. When the leftist administration came to office in 2009, even if they had plans and alternatives that don't just include imprisonment and punitive policing, there was always an intervention from the U.S. Embassy to undermine those efforts and to impose the things that come with their military and security financing.
Yep. I mean, that's a long history of that, right? The United States meddling to prop up its corporate interests, whether it's here or elsewhere, right? And so, I mean, I feel like what you're pointing to is clear, is like the war on gangs, right? And of course, we recognize a lot of the violence and like a lot of the very real hurt that our people have lived through for a long time, right? We also recognize where all of this comes from as far as root causes, right? Like you mentioned, the destabilization of it from the United States for years, exploitation of our people, of our lands, etc., that leave our folks like destabilized, right? But like all those conditions, then those get weaponized and exploited, right? And so, like, what can you tell us about how things like criminalization and the war on gangs are being used for other means by the state and the elite?
Yes. So I'm gonna share, I think I'm gonna skip that one for now, but these are some images that we're seeing in the media right now about Bukele's mega prison. And what we're hearing in the press and international media is that he got rid of gangs. And so I think one thing I just want to point out that is really important is that these are the images that that the current president of El Salvador, who is a dictator and is in power in violation of the country's constitution, wants us to see these because he's selling this prison. We already know he offered it to the Trump administration to incarcerate people who have been convicted of crimes, including U.S. citizens. So this picture in the corner is Matt Gaetz visiting the Secot. Elon Musk has also visited the Secot. That's the name of the prison. It's the Center for Terrorist Confinement. So I believe it holds 40,000 prisoners. Basically what happened under the state of exception in El Salvador is that due process rights have been suspended. Several constitutional protections have been suspended under the excuse of the war on gangs. And it's been 3 years now since that policy was instituted, which is supposed to be an emergency measure that's supposed to last at the most a month. And even for the reasons why he implemented were a violation of the Constitution. But now it's been 3 years, and 80,000 people at least have been incarcerated under the measure. And El Salvador is a very, very small country. It's like the size of the population of LA County, maybe. And they've arrested 80,000 people at least under this measure. And the thing is that there's still the prisons that existed before, they still exist today. So I wanted to show this other image because most of the prisoners that have been arrested under the state of exception are actually in these other prisons. The people who had been arrested under the previous iterations of the mano dura policies or tough on crime policies were transferred to the new state of the art prison. And the question is like, what is it being used for? And I just want to say that what it's being used for is to attack impoverished communities, to attack marginalized communities. So I have some kind of images here that show, El Salvador as a prison, and it says in this, en esta cárcel maldita, in this forsaken jail where sadness reigns, and we don't punish crime, we punish poverty. And then the sign here at a protest, no more criminalizing the working class. And here we have an image of, the hundreds, if not thousands of mothers that are looking for their sons, daughters, husbands, etc., family members. And also a lot of women, thousands of women have also been arrested under false accusations of being a gang member with no evidence at all. This is what happens when due process rights are suspended and constitutional rights are suspended. And I have pictures here also of people protesting these measures, and so what is also happening is there's a picture here of people. Movir is the movement of victims of the regime. And so it's made up of family members who are denouncing the illegal arrest of their family members. So they take to the streets, they bring pictures of their family members.
Yeah.
And what the state of exception is also now being used
Real
for
quick,
is to criminalize
my
them.
bad. My bad to interrupt. Real quick,
Sorry, it's okay.
you're getting little turtles in the chat. To slow down real quick.
Oh,
And
okay,
then,
okay, okay.
yeah, and real quick, we have a couple more minutes for this section. I got one more question for you, but go for it. Finish your thought.
Yeah, I think it's really important for me to get this out there, which is just that, the judicial system is being used to criminalize poor communities and communities that are organizing against his policies that are creating more poverty. So here we have campesino, land defenders who are fighting against displacement, who have been arrested on false accusations of being in gangs. Also, anti-mining, historic anti-mining activists. And the link that I put in there is a campaign that we're working on right now is for the freedom of Fidel Zavala and the La Floresta community, which is kind of the biggest escalation that just happened a couple of weeks ago under this regime. And basically, their cases are going to be heard in organized crime courts. So this community that was organizing against an illegal eviction, and the advocate that Fidel has become a spokesperson for human rights because he was unjustly arrested and testified what he witnessed, the torture that he witnessed, and now they're going to be tried in organized crime courts. So that's kind of a very specific case there, and I put information there. There's an Amnesty International alert that people can take, an action alert, as well as a CSPIS link that we're gonna update. But yeah, the other question.
No, thank you. And I'm gonna make sure we get that link as well and send to folks in a follow-up email. Just one more question. We know Trump has used propaganda a lot, right? In the media. Just last week when they did the raids in Virginia, they had press coverage as well. And Bukele has done very similarly, being using media and platforms like X, right, as the state. So if in like 1 minute, if you could just give us like how you think that mirrors what we're seeing here too.
Yeah, I can also share a Reuters investigation that was done about the use of troll farms by the Bukele administration. But one of the things that I kind of went over is the use of the secot, as and like he doesn't let people go into the other prisons. He like people want to cover what's happening in El Salvador, and so the media is only allowed to cover the secot. And so you have these really sensationalized images of this mega prison, this mega jail that he's built. But the other thing that I think is really important is that obviously the trolls, the purpose of them is to create the illusion of mass approval. And so when people get arbitrarily arrested and falsely accused of being in a gang, I didn't put this picture in here, but I should have. The attorney general had put out the community members from La Floresta. I mean, these are campesinos that are trying to fight an eviction, and there's like a perp picture of them as though they are gang member, organized crime leaders. And so a lot of times what happens is that when people want to denounce the fact that their family member or their community member has been illegally arrested, the trolls come into their comments and claim that they know them and that they're actually a gang member. And so that's the function, a lot of trolls, at least in El Salvador and under this current situation.
Thank you so much, Yesenia. Appreciate you sharing all of your experience and knowledge about what's happening in El Salvador with us. And I'm going to change to Spanish. Y como sabemos, esto es súper importante poder saber y aprender de los casos internacionalmente también, y en particular en contextos políticos como este, que los Estados Unidos tienen lazos tan, pues, de largo tiempo, ¿verdad? En El Salvador políticamente y con las industrias de capital, ¿verdad? Muchas gracias por lo que has compartido con nosotros. Y lo otro es, pues ahora podemos pasarnos al siguiente espacio.
Thank you, everyone.
Y mientras ponemos a las otras personas que van a entrar al diálogo ahorita, parte de lo que creemos también es importante es pues tener este análisis, ¿verdad? De lo de la criminalización, los ataques que hemos visto en la semana, pues no solo la semana pasada, ¿verdad? Pero en tiempo atrás, por esta administración Trump, pero también por previas administraciones demócratas y republicanos, ¿verdad? Contra las comunidades migrantes. siempre han tenido una agenda de expandir la criminalización, sea a niveles locales, estatales o federales, ¿verdad? Y esto lo vemos ahora pues a una escala drásticamente más grande y más violenta. Y pues es lo que queremos también tener eso en mente mientras pues seguimos hoy en nuestro diálogo y en cómo podemos tomar acción. Creo que faltan dos personas, Laura y Jessie, para que entren en este espacio.
Ya aprendieron su video, qué bueno.
Ahora sí. Listo.
¿Y quién falta? Jessie, ¿no?
Jessie, sí. Pues por mientras vamos a empezar, ahí estamos, gracias. Vamos a empezar brevemente, pues saben que tenemos unas preguntas y tuvimos un cambio hoy, Jesse, muchísimas gracias por entrar a este espacio de último minuto, ¿verdad? Pero agradecemos muchísimo tu participación y que nos vas a poder compartir mucho contexto que necesitamos. Y entonces, para iniciar, eh, quiero que si podemos dar solo brevemente, decir nuestro nombre, pronombre, organización y como un poquito de qué hace su organización y luego entramos a las preguntas. Entonces, ¿qué tal si empezamos contigo, Beatriz?
Sí, hola a todos, buenas noches. Mi nombre es Beatriz Batres, estoy organizando actualmente con la colectiva y también parte de la coalición de Liberen a Todes. Y precisamente eso, hacemos trabajo de desarrollo de base, pero también enfocando las voces de nuestras comunidades para cerrar centros de detenciones y proteger a nuestras comunidades locales del abuso de la migra entre la policía y la migra. Se lo puedo pasar a Laura.
Gracias y buenas noches a todos. Soy Laura Rivera y trabajo con un grupo que se llama Just Futures Law. Apoyamos a grupos de base que están luchando por la justicia inmigrante, la justicia digital en los medios y mucho gusto estar aquí. Y se lo paso a Jessie.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jesse Franzblau, he, him pronouns, with the National Immigrant Justice Center. The National Immigrant Justice Center is based in Chicago, Illinois, and represents individuals in their immigration cases throughout the Midwest, handles cases for over 10,000 people a year, people going through their immigration cases, fighting to get people out of detention. And I'm based in our DC policy office, where I focus a lot on federal advocacy, advocating for an end to detention, and doing a lot of work around funding, trying to slash funds for the Department of Homeland Security to shift towards communities. We'll pass it over to Ramsha.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ramsha Sajid. I work with Media Justice. Media Justice is a national org that fights back against the collusion between the state and tech corporations. And my role, I'm on our political education team as our senior learning specialist. And I'll pass it back to you, Danny.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited for this conversation. And as I said earlier in the beginning of the call, right, this is, we don't have presentations. This is pretty like chill, right? And we also encourage you all who are here joining us today to like contribute in the chat, right? If you have questions, reactions, etc., go for it, right? Throw in some little emojis, throw in reactions, and let's just make this a space where we can like learn collectively. Of course, we're going to hear from specific people, right? But we can also learn from y'all through those like the mechanisms like a chat too. And so let's get started with Beatriz. I've alluded to what's been happening in Northern Virginia, right? Last week, there was a lot happening and so in our area. And so maybe Beatriz, if you could share for a few minutes, what we've been dealing with.
Sí, claro. Bueno, la semana pasada ha sido muy violenta, muy fuerte para nuestras comunidades. Hemos visto cómo diferentes agencias federales están llegando a destruir puertas, aterrorizando a nuestras comunidades, no les importa si hay niños, si hay mujeres mayores. Tampoco han respetado el hecho de que se están llevando a las personas sin importar y aunque tengan un estatus legal. Y esto es preocupante. Es preocupante porque muchas de nuestras comunidades se está viendo criminalizadas, especialmente por el color de su piel o por cómo lucen, cómo se están expresando. Muchas de las familias están extremadamente preocupadas por la vigilancia que está creciendo en las escuelas. Y nuestra gente a diario tiene miedo de salir de sus casas, pero no saber si va a regresar, si van a separarlas de sus hijos, si van a alguien de su familia estar encarcelado. Y lo más preocupante todavía es que funcionarios locales en realidad no están tomando acción, porque dar una publicación vía Twitter o antes Twitter, ahora X, con una presentación de Conoce tus derechos, pues la realidad es que nuestra gente no usa ese tipo de plataformas. Entonces esas no son las reacciones que queremos, no queremos comunicados de prensa, queremos que vengan, se reúnan con la gente, escuchen directamente de la comunidad que ha sido impactada, de la comunidad que está siendo criminalizada y traumatizada de formas que no son reparables. El trauma que crea todo este miedo, esta agenda de odio, va a permanecer para siempre en sus vidas. Y esto también nos lleva a puntos en los que afectan directamente a niños, a niñas. ¿Qué nos espera en el futuro? Están peligroso lo que está pasando ahora con la reapertura de los centros de detención de familias, que ahora el foco son familias que ya están en el país, pero que al tener un estatus mixto, en realidad no se sabe cuál va a ser el proceso, los cargos que van a poner. Es una nueva forma de continuar criminalizando y todavía generando este miedo similar a lo que decía Jesse. Es muy parecido a lo que empezó a hacer Bukele. En El Salvador, las personas no pueden mencionar que están en desacuerdo porque son encarceladas. Y ya lo estamos viendo con este activista que acaban de quitarle su estatus y lo quieren hasta deportar. Entonces, es preocupante que también a nosotros, como voces de la comunidad, empiecen a meternos ese miedo, pero también es parte del cómo empezamos a encontrar estrategias para alzar nuestras voces y la de nuestra comunidad, que no sean los políticos los que estén hablando a nombre de la gente, sino nuestras comunidades denunciando los abusos que están sucediendo. Hay mucha gente que por miedo a tener contactos con la policía no denuncia todas estas cosas que vienen sucediendo, no de ahora, vienen sucediendo de hace mucho tiempo y esto es una bomba de tiempo que si no reaccionamos todos, todas, a poder contribuir para proteger a nuestras comunidades, esto va a ser un desastre. No sé si alguien más quisiera compartir, Dani, o continuamos.
I'm actually gonna add, like, you know, you mentioned about the role of politicians, right? And like, you're right, they should be doing a lot more right now. And in particular, because they've done so much to build this deportation machine in the first place, right? You know, here in Northern Virginia, we are in an area that is represented by Democrats, you know, from local offices through federal offices, right? And if we look at their records, we can see that they have voted in favor of expanding budgets for ICE or DHS in the past. We can see that they have, you know, even local state officials have had like direct ties to working for an ICE prison, right? For a prison company. We've seen that they have taken contributions from the prison industrial complex or ICE contractors, right? So maybe I'll pass it over to you, Jesse, if you could kick us off talking a little bit about like this, that we know this deportation machine didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't just start with Trump, right? It was given to him. So what can you tell us a little bit about how it's expanded over administrations?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I think the really pivotal place to look is around funding. So the congressional funding that is provided for federal agencies to carry out mass detention and mass deportations. And remembering that this is that, you know, these are public dollars. This is public money, and every billion that goes towards dollar that goes towards mass detention and deportations is being taken away from other social programs, education, Medicare, and we're seeing this more and more clearly now as Congress is debating this budget, and also this week they're debating this continuing resolution, so the appropriations request, which would increase the budget for ICE to up to $10 billion a year. But it's incredibly important to note how this funding has grown over the past decades, particularly just going back to around 2003 with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, of course, under the Bush administration, in the wake of September 11th, when there was a lot of panic around national security and the creation of the DHS and the flooding of funds for the growth of ICE, the growth of these agencies to really go after and target our neighbors and immigrant communities. And so looking at just the budget, so ICE's budget in 2004 was around $3.5 billion, which is still exorbitant, but now we're looking at $10 billion. Last year, it was under the Biden administration, it was $9.4 billion or so. So we're just talking exorbitant amounts of money. That doesn't even include U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, which we know is also carrying out operations, even internal operations. We know a family was picked up just in Washington, D.C. by Border Patrol officials earlier this week. The story has started to come out. We've been seeing this growth of more federal agencies being involved in immigration enforcement and this crackdown on immigrant communities, such as the Drug Enforcement Agency and other agencies. But this has been a long trend of federal funding that's been improved under Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, and that's been improved and increased whether the Democrats are in power or the Republicans are in power. So this has been a bipartisan increase, and it's incredibly vital to push back on members, on every member that is approving this, because again, these are public funds that need to be going towards communities and not towards this detention and deportation machine.
That's interesting, Jesse, because what I wanted to share with folks really ties into the funding too. And going back to this question of, what did Trump inherit? And there's a lot of tech tools to surveil folks, surveil members of our communities. And these companies are making billions of taxpayer dollars by selling these tech tools to ICE, to CBP. And, one example I wanted to share with folks is the ISAP program, which stands for Intensive Surveillance Appearance Program. This is a program that is run by a big tech / private prison company called Geo Group that many of you probably are familiar with. And currently, ICE is surveilling close to 200,000 community members under the ISAP program. These are folks that have cases in immigration court or had it, and it's currently closed. And they make people report to ICE, and they put ankle shackles on people to track them. And it's been going on for 20 years with Geo Group running the show the whole time. And Biden drastically expanded it. They have an app now they download on community members' phones. It's called SmartLink. And it can track community members' locations, physical locations at any given time. And of course, these folks that are on ISAP, being tracked are more vulnerable to enforcement. And under Trump, some of the community members have been targeted in raids. But what has changed, I think, is this administration is more vocal about using immigration police to repress political activism. You know, with Mahmoud Khalil and others being taken in by ICE due to their political work for calling a genocide. Similarly, with the social media monitoring, you know, DHS was already monitoring social media. The contracts with the companies that track our social media already existed. Giant Oak, Shadow Dragon, they already used it to surveil organizing. Now the administration is putting it on blast to instill fear and to stoke this base.
Sí, y en efecto, está creando tanto caos porque ya hay muchos activistas, muchas personas que hacen trabajo para elevar las voces que están empezando a tener miedo. Pero también es ahí donde hay mucha gente joven que empiezan a sumarse al movimiento y que este es un momento crucial en el que tanta gente quiere ayudar y sumarse. Es necesario y crítico que exista una guía, porque entonces cuando actuamos bajo pánico o sin un conocimiento de cómo deberían de funcionar las cosas, pero también cómo irrumpimos y cómo creamos estrategias, pues la gente tiene miedo de expresarse. Entonces, aquí es la pregunta también es, ¿cómo empezamos a crear desde cero estas estrategias para protegernos nosotros, pero también a la gente que se está sumando al movimiento? Porque necesitamos a nuestra gente. Si la gente no se manifiesta, si nosotros no estamos alzando las voces, esto puede llegar a niveles como en El Salvador o peor. Y estamos en el país de la libertad. Entonces, aquí hay un poco más de chance que en El Salvador de poder interferir y hacer estos cambios desde la comunidad, porque hay más fuerza todavía tenemos más fuerza en las calles o al hacernos escuchar que lo que hay en El Salvador actualmente.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different factors at play here for sure, right? And we heard the pieces around like the previous administrations, the funding mechanisms, right? The ways that the big tech corporations, that I really appreciate that framing, Laura, of like it's a big tech / private prison corporation, and we got to name it what it is, right? And also like the role that they play, right? And folks were mentioning the fear as well, right? And for example, things like even like being surveilled at all times through programs like ISAP, it's violating, it's creating fear. And then what you were just mentioning, Beatriz, also trying to like, you know, hurt the organizing work. And for example, the detention of Mahmoud that was just mentioned, a lot of that also happens through like press media weapons, right? That are used that we know have also been a big part of building up this deportation machine. And like now what we're seeing is like Trump using big media as well in many ways. So I'm wondering if I could pass it over to you, Ramsha, to like share a little bit about like some of your work. I know has focused a lot on like copaganda and developing tools to support communities around that. So yeah, I want to pass it over to see what you want to add here.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I think in our work at Media Justice, we found that propaganda works because there's often a communication breakdown between news outlets and the communities that they report on who are directly impacted. When we did our project Propaganda Clapback, we did workshops across the country. And we learned that many police departments have public relations and media divisions that work to feed local media with pro-police and anti-immigrant narratives. Often in our regional workshops, we were in, for example, Minneapolis, we'd heard about how local media outlets who were owned by Fox or another big media conglomerate had direct ties to police, such as a news anchor's husband being a cop. And often these groups would use police statements and government agency statements as fact and report them to the public as fact. But we know from many years of reporting on police misconduct that police can lie and will lie to support their own interests. And there's so many ways in particular that the media shares harmful narratives about migrants. So in particular, I think in Chicago, there's been a linkage by media outlets of associating migrants with crime and houselessness. And that's a big tell of a copaganda narrative when it skews our personal understanding of safety and widens this threat of crime so that we believe that policing is the answer. And that's just not true. Policing is not the answer. Department of Homeland Security is not the answer. We have data that shows that migrants are not intrinsically more likely to commit crimes. But we also know that migrant communities are severely over-policed, are severely hyper-surveilled, and those propaganda narratives serve to justify that over-policing.
Oof, thank you. Appreciate that breakdown. I mean, and like really, it's like it kind of like circles back to me from like the first conversation we had earlier, right? Where we know that the role of the United States, the government, the state, right, and its corporate partners, the wealthy, has constantly been to otherize, right, and to try to control people for the good of the wealthy and the rich and the capitalism, right? That's the way it's been managed as far as El Salvador. Many of us from there like recognize that it's like dynamics often mirror what's a colony, right? That the United States just tries to control everything there, including exporting an agenda of criminalization and prison systems, right? And then what we're seeing here is of course just at a bigger scale, right? So thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna aprovechar. I think I apologize, interpreters. I prefer the Spanish version of that word than saying it in English. That we're here in this space, and just ask if y'all would like to share any opportunities for folks who are joining us today, like how they can take action, right, into supporting some of these efforts to support migrant communities and others who are being targeted by the state and corporations. So I know, Jesse, you mentioned some funding, right? And so if there's anything that comes to mind, and then Beatriz, I'm gonna wait for you last because we have very specific actions that people can take to support the local work. And if there are resources, et cetera, that you'd like to just lift up, it doesn't have to be like an action, right? But just wanted to give space for that too. So Jesse, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Danny. And I want to give a big shout out to Detention Watch Network that we worked with to put up this action alert. And so this one is particularly around funding. So folks that want to send a letter and or call their representative. So particularly any folks in New York who are, you know, your friends and family community in New York, members to make calls to New York senators, particularly Senator Schumer, has a lot of power over what's happening really at this moment in terms of funding and how much funding ICE is going to get, and also how many accountability mechanisms are going to be included in this funding. So they're currently, Congress is working to essentially strip away any mechanisms that they can use to even track and follow and monitor how money is being used by the Trump administration. So they're essentially ceding, they're ready to cede enormous amount of power over to the executive branch at a time when more scrutiny is needed, now more than ever. So this is an action alert just to call your member and say, don't cede power over to the Trump administration, don't approve this short-term funding measure, and to push and to push your member of Congress to push back on this. Oh, and there's one more that I'll drop in. That's a template which has a little bit more details and information for any folks that want to pull and also write directly to a member of Congress with some more details about what is in this funding proposal.
Thank you so much, Jesse. wanted to see if maybe Laura or Ramsha wanted to add anything about this or anything else.
Well, I know that Beatriz was speaking about how important it is for us to get information and to understand how to protect our own formations as we carry out this political work. And one of the things that Just Futures Law has been doing is trainings on digital security for organizers, so that as you're plugging in with your comrades to organize, that you make sure that you're taking action to minimize the risk of sensitive communications being exposed. So I can share in the chat links to a couple of resources in case you're interested in learning more and adapting some of the tech you're using, so you can have some greater privacy in carrying out your work.
Yeah, and I would love to share. Media Justice is also doing a series on the connections between corporations and big tech and the state and the government. And so we have a series called WTF, The Rise of the Broligarchy, where we're doing bi-weekly political education on issues related to immigration and AI and everything else you can think of that's current in our political moment. And so I can share the registration link for that if you're interested in continuing the conversation on immigration.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, folks, please check that out. It's a great series. And sorry about the little barking here. My dog came to hang out with me. The other thing I also wanted to mention, right, kind of connecting it back, is I really encourage folks to like research your elected officials and look into like who they have ties to, as far as like ICE contractors, who they've been taking money from, or what type of votes they have taken, as well as, for example, the budgets that Jesse was mentioning. You know, here in the local Northern Virginia context, right, like over the years of research, we found out that a local state delegate contracted with the ICA private prison company, for example, here in Virginia. We also found out that member of Congress Jerry Connolly has been a longtime recipient of money from MVM Inc., one of the primary contractors for ICE that handles family separation. So when kids are being taken from their parents at the border, MVM Inc. was the company that transported the children, right? And they are longtime donors of the Democratic establishment in Virginia. We learned about other companies like, you know, Amazon as well, Meta, all the big corporations that we know are also part of this whole system, are also major donors and influencers with these politicians, right? So all of that, we think is really helpful. Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for dropping that link. Is really helpful also for increasing our analysis and how we can create pressure over elected officials and move them to actually support our communities, right? And then the other part of it is that we can also look for local solutions, right? I think this is a time, it's always been a time where our politicians need to actually choose whose side they're on, right? But particularly now, where it's a very clear threat of fascism, I think some politicians are not, I don't know how they're not getting it, but it's very clear, right? And so we need to make that clear for them, and we need to ensure that they like say that they're going to be down to support our communities, and not give in, right? And not see it as just Jesse was saying. And some of that also is local examples. So I'll pass it over to Beatriz to share a few examples of how we're taking action in Arlington County to try to expand protections for migrant communities.
Sí, gracias, Dani. Y bueno, localmente estamos trabajando dos campañas. Y la primera es para sacar a la migra de Arlington. Hemos avanzado bastante con esta campaña, ha sido difícil. Y creo que la gente todavía no dimensionaba lo que nosotros sí al iniciar esta campaña, y es justamente prevenir lo que vimos la semana pasada y lo que vamos a seguir viendo probablemente. Entonces, este sábado 15 también vamos a tener una acción directa en el condado de Arlington a las 9 de la mañana. Es importante el poder hacer estas conexiones y que nuestra gente empiece a tomar ese liderazgo. Recuerdo que cuando comenzamos a llegar al condado, ni siquiera tenían acceso a interpretación. y siempre era como todavía no tienen el tiempo para podernos escuchar, no contamos todavía con una interpretación en el cual las personas sí se puedan expresar como deberían utilizando la justicia del lenguaje. Y eso es preocupante porque mucha de nuestra comunidad es diversa. Y si vamos a estos lugares, vamos a ver solamente gente blanca que se preocupa por otras situaciones, pero no son impactados realmente por todo este ciclo de violencia que nuestras comunidades migrantes sí son impactadas. Entonces voy a compartir también este link por si quieren venir y unirse el sábado a las 9 de la mañana. Pero juntamente también estamos, y para poder exigir que terminen con la sección 7, pero también podamos ampliar las protecciones a nuestras comunidades locales. Y esto poniendo un precedente de que sí se pueden hacer estos cambios. Y esta campaña se conecta mucho con nuestra campaña de cerrar el centro de detención de Farmville. Es uno de los centros que ha causado tanto miedo, tanta muerte y que durante la pandemia fue uno de los que literalmente quedó vacío, pero seguía recibiendo dinero. Entonces eso es algo comprobado que no necesitamos detenciones. Este dinero se puede reutilizar para invertir en la comunidad. Estamos viendo cómo la renta está subiendo, estamos viendo cómo el presupuesto para educación también están disminuyendo y cómo eso está poniendo en riesgo a nuestras comunidades y a nuestros niños que a lo mejor no van a poder ir al college porque le están dando dinero a corporaciones que siembran miedo, que matan a nuestra comunidad, que hay un sinfín de historias de gente que ha sobrevivido a esto, pero que el trauma no va a terminar ahí. Entonces necesitamos que la gente empiece a poder conectar estos puntos. Todo comienza con que la policía te detenga en Arlington, te pongan en una detención simplemente porque no tienes tus documentos y empieza este proceso a ponerte en un proceso de deportación, lo cual genera tanto trauma, tantas situaciones para nuestras familias, tanto para la persona que está dentro como las personas alrededor, porque afecta de forma emocional, pero también la economía de la familia. Entonces, al estarnos poniendo en estas situaciones, estamos generando un ciclo de violencia que no va a parar si no ponemos alto. Entonces, en nuestra petición de Liberen a Todes, prácticamente estamos pidiéndole al congresista Bayer que se pueda reunir con nosotros, que se reúna con la comunidad para escuchar nuestras demandas. Hemos estado ya 3 veces, nos hemos reunido más de 6 meses. Hasta el día de hoy no ha querido reunirse con nosotros. No es porque no hemos buscado, es simplemente que no ha querido, su staff no quiere. Y las peticiones para esto es que se reúna con nosotros, con la gente que hay de su distrito que está detenida actualmente en Farmville, que haga una declaración pública en apoyo al cierre de Farmville y también, especialmente ahorita, que no firme este fondo que quieren dar para ICE y para el CBP, porque eso va a generar más encarcelamiento, más vigilancia, más trauma, más sufrimiento para nuestras familias, no solamente en el norte de Virginia, sino que en todo el país y fuera de él también.
Thank you, Beatriz. And so just to recap, right? So folks, if you are, I know there are a good amount of folks here who are local in Northern Virginia or DC, but we have folks in other places too. So there are different ways to plug in and help support what we're doing. If you are nearby on Saturday, we'll be at the Arlington County Board meeting. We also have digital petitions to support, including for the ICE Out of Arlington campaign, and also for the Free Them All Virginia campaign, calling on Representative Don Beyer to take clear, proactive action to support demands by migrant communities. We'll be making sure to send that information as well in follow-up emails. And I believe for this part of the dialogue, that's it. We have one more speaker that's going to share something brief, but thank you so much, Laura, Ramsha, Beatriz, and Jesse. Please, everybody, give them some love in the chat, in the reactions. And then now, if Ernesto, you can help us bring Asim to the spotlight, and then those of us here can be we can remove the spotlight. While you do that, I'm gonna introduce Asim, who is a homie from here locally as well, who is involved with Arlington for Palestine. And you know, we recognize that the same corporations that are part of the detention deportation machine are same corporations that are part of the war machine, right? And they are also the same ones that are influencing our elected officials. And so this is a quick statement of solidarity. I'll pass it over to you, SM.
Thanks, Danny, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. And yeah, I appreciate the space and some area to kind of get an intersectional message here, um, because I think a lot of the companies and entities involved in the deportation machine are involved in many other imperial conquests. I think one of the things we're focused on here at Arlington, with Arlington for Palestine, is the genocide in Gaza. And one of the main links, I think, that exemplify this connection is one company called Elbit Systems. Um, that's another subject of another campaign that we have to eject Elbit from Arlington. They are Israel's largest weapons manufacturer. They manufacture bombs, drones, surveillance towers, other surveillance technologies that are battle tested in Gaza and then deployed in other areas like the southern border. But beyond that, there are other companies, Microsoft, Amazon, um, other tech companies that again deploy technologies that are used not just within the deportation machine, but within the context of uh, the genocide in Gaza, but other areas in the world. Um, but yeah, I think I like the concept of the fact of there being more than one front within this battle. Like it's not just the bombs being dropped in Gaza or uh, the border or in our local communities. It's ensuring that like we can sever these financial ties that incentivize profit off of oppressing people in our community or even people abroad. Um, it's essentially, as I see it, disparate threads of oppression and injustice kind of bound together by common structures of power, control, and capital. And that was like I guess a quick overview of kind of what I saw as like a direct intersection. But yeah, there are many threads, especially within Arlington, being home to, of course, like the Pentagon, and other many federal agencies as well. But I guess one point that you had brought up was I think the contradiction of like democratic values. We live in an area that espouses and tries to live out and build political clout on progressive values that they say they care about our communities and things like that, but at the same time, they tie our economic prosperity to the destruction of our communities here, but also communities abroad. Um, and so, one of the things that we're trying to clarify within some of our messaging and campaign is just to be more honest. That, like, if you actually care about these things, then work with us. Work with us to sever these ties. Or just, be more honest. Be more honest about this and say that, like, okay, you don't care about us, you like deportations, and you like genocide. To me, it's kind of a bit of a binary, one or the other, but they kind of try and obfuscate and blur the lines in a way where they can tell their political base that, hey, we care, when in actuality, they actually don't care. They're still beholden to a lot of the donor and political classes um, that financially back them.
Yeah, 100%. I feel that. I mean, I like it's equally enraging and violent, right? I organized in Texas for a few years, and there were like local Democrats who were in office, but they would at least say, "Yeah, we're gonna keep collaborating with ICE." Like they would be honest, right? Meanwhile, here they try to front, and they are just lying to us, right? And sometimes that can be even more frustrating. So I appreciate you saying that. And then one more thing I wanted to add before I kick it over to you, just to like also share briefly, maybe if you want to share about like the local work that's happening around Eject Albin and also like the city council stuff, Alexander, if you want to add about that, is that in a lot of our local conversations, and I know folks here and more broadly nationally, a lot of us are paying attention to things like data centers, right? And that is what a lot of big tech corporations are now focused on, and the so-called AI stuff, right? But we know that these data centers are also being used to, connecting back to the earlier conversation, displace people from their lands, right? They're also being used to like collect and extract information from us that then gets sold, and then it's sold to agencies like ICE, right? And then these data centers also host a lot of tech weapons, right, that are used in genocide in Gaza right now, things like that. So yeah, I wanted to also name that because being in Northern Virginia, data center alley is right here. And so we can do a lot of work to organize and create interventions at different levels. So yeah, real quick, do you want to share about, any upcoming activities or ways to support the local work?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Thank you, Rory, in the chat. You mentioned one of our campaigns to eject Elbit. We have been trying to build a program of actions and events to put the pressure on the building owners, in particular, to highlight exactly what they're doing and that it contradicts all sorts of values that we hold dear. But we're also now shifting focus within the county on divestment efforts. And within Arlington, there are many threads. So just investments within companies that facilitate not just genocide, the destruction of the planet, and related to climate change, but also the deportation machine as well. But one target that's being clarified is the Arlington economic development, where in this particular moment, they're trying to address the lack or the shortfall in federal funding and the federal workforce in a way where they're trying to cater businesses from the tech sector. And I think one aspect that's very insidious about this is that they obfuscate and confuse the type of tech companies that they're bringing in with language like cybersecurity, aerospace and defense, uh, big like AI, things like that, where I think if we actually understand where these technologies are being employed, they're creating drone operators, they're creating like AutoCAD designers that are making the new, like latest bombs. Like these are not jobs that we want in our community or like anywhere. And so I think clarifying that will hopefully build pressure on like the audience in Virginia and Arlington in particular to better understand the type of jobs and economy that our government is currently trying to bring in, and that they are deprioritizing other parts or other industries. And I want to see if I could put a quick image in the chat. Yeah. So here, I wanted to put in a screenshot from Arlington Economic Development where they lay out clearly like what they're prioritizing, where primary industries are, again, clouded behind terminology that, you can't really understand some of the destruction behind that. But then you can also see that they're deprioritizing other areas and businesses that would be more representative and consistent with some of our values, like addressing climate change or other areas. Um, and so as a part of our divestment campaign, we've started to do outreach to local community groups, and that's going to take different avenues. So reaching out to civic associations, community groups and organizations, the Arlington County Treasurer themselves. Um, and yeah, if you're interested, let me know. But there's a deep, deep intersection, especially as it pertains to Arlington's place in the world.
100%. Thank you so much, Asim. And I'm seeing some really helpful connections in the chat too. Laura also sharing about Elbit surveillance towers at the border. And I'm also going to drop the Instagram for one of the groups here locally, Alexander for Palestine. We know that these projects of state violence and corporate violence often also include other types of institutions, which here in this area, as Amazon's HQ2 has been, expanding, and along with what Asim was saying, they're trying to recruit other tech corporations and partners of theirs here. And that also includes collusion with institutions like Virginia Tech. If folks check out Alexander for Palestine's Instagram and social medias, you'll see a dope action that was done recently at an opening of an event at the Virginia Tech campus in Alexandria. So a lot of powerful organizing happening. And again, we recognize the intersections, the connections across the issues, our people, and also the targets, right? And how we need to, build solidarity and continue to do that to build power, right? So thank you so much, Asim. And I think that takes us to the end, right? So you can remove the spotlight from Asim Ernesto. And I think, yeah, I just want to see some activity still in the chat, but if folks just can do a quick, like some reactions, some claps, some love for our speakers this evening, that'd be really great. And that's it for this evening. I just want to reiterate the calls to action, right, that Beatriz shared. If you're local, Saturday, we have a county board meeting in Arlington County. Folks are also going to the city of Alexandria, and then we'll make sure to share out the digital ways to support and email follow-up. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you joining us. Have a great night.